The only reason financial services is doing it is because they have regulators making them do that. So one, is that true? And, two, like, where is the value? Is it just to be compliant with regulation, or is there something more?
Very good question. And I'm thinking now, do I want to answer it positive or the way I already feel? Let's go positive first. So you are absolutely correct. In terms of regulatory just environments, which is across multiple industries, there's a ton of value in user access reviews because it is both a detective and really a corrective type of control. At the end of the day, it's done to say, hey, should Jeff and Jim still maintain this access? And if they shouldn't, let me create an action where I do an attestation and say, nope, I want them out. And then some technology, some tool goes and remove them from that access. And for small, mid-sized companies, it works really well because there's not a lot of bloat in small and mid-sized businesses. The larger the company is, the more job roles of companies were really strong, let's say, on RBAC, role-based access control. The more RBAC you use, the larger your access role environment is going to be, the more access certification, user access reviews you have. Once you hit that threshold, now it becomes more of, is there value in this, or is it just a checkbox activity?
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Doing good. Obviously, we always start every show off with banter. So I was like, okay, what am I going to hit you with this time? And I was kind of thinking back to, one of the areas where I've really been wanting to put together an episode. And the topic is device identity. And so what I did this week on Monday was I launched a poll question on LinkedIn. So it was, in your mind, is device identity the discipline focused on? And then I put a couple of options like a device's role in authentication, the account's local to a device, both, or something else. And it got 55 responses. It got 3 reactions, so basically 3 thumbs up, and it got over 1,200 impressions. So I'm wondering what it was about how I put that poll question together that didn't make it very popular to respond to. Do you think?
Did I respond to it? I know I saw it, and then I don't remember if I clicked my answer or not.
Well, I don't know. Okay. I don't know if you did. I don't have that data point.
Well, we'll just say I did because I'm a good partner in crime on this type of stuff.
Yeah. So I think with the whole non-human identity topic, right? That's getting all the attention. But then we talk about device identity a lot. And, my perspective has been, I don't really think a device has identity. And I'm starting to change that opinion. So I think within the whole non-human identity realm, you've got workload identities, and then you have device identities. And really, it's this whole, I think at the core of why a device identity is even important is this whole shift of identity is at the center. Identity at the center, of course, is the name of our podcast. We could take full credit for that from, 6 years ago. But the idea that, firewalls used to basically say, all right, you can either come in or not come in based on IP address and port and things like that. And now they're getting smarter where, they can actually use authentication. And then when you think about zero trust, you're not just talking about the firewall, but you're talking about the infrastructure layers below the firewall. And you're talking about traversing from one network segment to the other. And should you simply do that based on IP address and port? Like, no. Some devices and some identities should have access to certain network segments than others. So to me, there's where we're kind of circling in. but I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this. And I would say basically the community either, is kind of like where I have been, which is like, I don't even know what that definition is, or, there's a mix of answers. I think most people came to a device's role in authentication, which kind of makes sense. Only 5 people out of the 55 said the account's local to a device, which I think is this non-human identity piece. Like 25% said something else. So anyway, I think that there's confusion on the topic out there. And what I want to do is have some podcast episodes where we talk about this and kind of start to solve, or at least put an answer behind it, the official Identity at the Center answer behind what is device identity.
Got it. Well, I just looked it up and I didn't vote, but I just voted now. And I think I tend to think of device identity as the device's role in authentication, because the other options were the account's local to a device. I feel like that's more like local account management or something like that. But I think this is an area where context matters maybe, and who you're talking to, because maybe I'm approaching it as like, okay, well, that's what makes sense to me from an authentication standpoint. Meanwhile, somebody who maybe does like, MDM work all the time, or, endpoint management might be thinking of a different way. I mean, IAM Community is really good at having multiple definitions for the same thing. So you kind of have to know who you're talking to and making sure that you're communicating effectively to make sure you're on the same page. That's, I don't want to one up you, man, but 1,000, impressions. I had 5,000 on one I asked this week. I got a lot of really good answers to a question that I posed on LinkedIn. And I got to tell you, the IAM brain trusts, the hive mind of people on LinkedIn came through. I was asking a relatively vague question around device identity, essentially. So this idea of tap and go, but without the tap part, almost kind of like an ultra wideband key or some sort of proximity authentication. The challenge being, what if you have multiple people in the same room? How do you identify the right person as part of that? And I gotta tell you, after 5,300 impressions and a whole bunch of views and like 30 or some 40 comments so far and counting, I had so many good people like reach out, put their thoughts into it. So there's no way I can reach out to everybody and thank them. So I'm just going to like as many comments as I can. But if you're listening to this and you posted, thank you so much. If you reached out to me on DMs or whatever it may be, I know I've got a couple meetings already set for next week to kind of talk through options, but it's something that, it's, I don't call it a pet project, but it's something that I've been thinking about. I was like, okay, is there an option in this space where tap to go can be just go or be and go or something like that? So shout out to the IAM experts on LinkedIn for taking a look at that and taking the time to respond. So I appreciate that.
I think LinkedIn, like any social media platform, has algorithms, right? So you posted that, you started getting comments, LinkedIn picked up, hey, this is a really popular thread. We're going to show it to more people. More people see it, more people comment, becomes viral. Obviously, I posted my poll, and it was not a very popular topic. So maybe we should have a bunch of, we should not have a bunch of episodes on this, but I still think it's something that we need some clarity around. But maybe we should have something on tap and go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what's there yet and what's realistic, because I think some of the caveats I threw out were like, okay, not proprietary. Give me something that's built off open standards. Maybe it's something that we can use FIDO authentication for. Maybe it's something that already exists elsewhere, SAML, OpenID, and maybe just putting the pieces together. But yeah, I mean, this is the great part of running this podcast. Like, I don't have all the answers. You don't have answers. Let's find smart people who do and get them on and ask them about it, because I'm sure other people have, similar or questions or things that they can contribute to. So it's not a race. I'm not, it's not that I got 5 times as many impressions of you. That's not what it's about, Jim.
Yeah, I've only said it like 5 times. But hey, by the way, I did one post one time and it got over 10,000 impressions.
That's great. I only bring it up because I don't think I've ever had a post that had that much traction. Like, even when I do the podcast weekly, that's, maybe a couple thousand, something like that. That's just people, checking out our new show. So for whatever reason, this idea of non-human identity and more user-friendly passwordless, right? Frictionless or less friction, I should say, from authentication seems to strike a chord. And I'm wondering if we can, let's put something up around that.
Yeah.
I think we should do a show around it.
Absolutely. So, hey, if anybody's listening who has a strong opinion, vendor agnostic strong opinion, reach out to us, questions@idac.com. It'll get to Jeff and I, and we'll try to do something.
Or if you're a vendor with a strong opinion, come on, run a sponsored episode and we'll ask you questions about it and get out there. So
absolutely.
Yeah. We got a couple conferences that we're going to be at later this year. One that we're not going to be at, but we do have a discount code for, is the Gartner IAM Summit taking place in London this March 24th and 25th. If you use the code IDAC425, you save, and I'm not sure if it's 425 euros or pounds, you will save 425 of some currency for that region, which is better than nothing for sure.
It might be rupees.
It could, who knows? Maybe it's, League of Legends gold coins. Who knows? You will save 425 of those.
Yeah, it's not 425 Bitcoins. I can tell you that.
No. Yeah, if you got 425 Bitcoins, you're probably doing all right. But that's a conference that has been nice enough to extend out a conference code for people to take advantage of. I'll have it it's already on our webpage, idacpodcast.com. I try to keep all of our current discount codes on that. So we've got the Gartner IAM Summit in London, again, March 24th and 25th. One that you and I are very excited to go at, we've talked about a couple times now at this point, is the European Identity and Cloud Conference in Berlin, May 6th through 9th. If you use the code IDAC25MKO, you get 25% off. And so you and I are going to be out in Berlin for a week, roughly. I think we're putting together what some podcasts might look like. And hopefully we'll even have time to actually attend the conference and not just be in a recording room the whole time.
Yeah, it's going to be so exciting. I mean, I've never been to Berlin. I've heard great things about the city. And I've heard great things about this conference. Heard that it's like information, will be coming out of your ears by the end. And I can say the organizers, obviously we've had Martin on the show. He's had us working with his conference team. Marina has been super fantastic about, helping us coordinate our activities while we're there. So yeah, we're going to record a few podcasts on site. And like you said, get to enjoy the conference a little bit. So hopefully we'll get to meet a lot of you there, and the conference code, discount code will help you save a couple bucks.
Yeah. And then hot off the presses, we have Identiverse 2025. That is in Las Vegas. So June 3rd to the 6th, if you use the code IDV25-IDAC25, you get 25% off. I know that's a mouthful. Again, the links will be in our show notes. They'll be on our website, and you can check it out there. But that's another one we're looking forward to. We've got some exciting plans that we probably shouldn't announce quite yet until we have things kind of signed, sealed, and figured out and I would say delivered, but planned and ready to go. But if you like prior conference activities that we have done, we may be doing something similar at Identiverse. Is that vague enough, Jim?
No. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's going to figure it out based on that, but 25's wild, so that 25% off for Identiverse 25, IDV 25-IDAC 25 code. I mean, look, it's if you can get to a conference this year, if you're US based, do it.
It's a fun conference too. There's a lot of really smart people that'll be there, and you learn something. So I'm a fan of it. Obviously, hats off to them, and thanks for them for their partnership on it. All right, why don't we turn to our guest, because he's been patiently waiting in the wings here for, over 10 minutes. I promised 5 to 10 minutes, and we're at 12 minutes. Let me welcome to the show Stephen Washington. He's the head of IAM at Discover Financial. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey, Jeff, Jim, pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a wonderful show you guys have.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time. And it's your first time being on the show, and hopefully not the last. We'll find out at the end if you still like us or not. But tell us about your IAM origin story. How did you get started in IAM? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
It chose me. I went to college. I got my degree in computer engineering. I wanted to be the best Java programmer in the world. I'm like, yes, go Java 2 struts all the way. My first job out of college, they said, yeah, you're going to start managing, web servers. I'm like, okay. And then they said, you need to manage LDAP directories. Like, LDAP? What is an LDAP? And to this day, I realize how the godfathers of IAM basically was Novell, or the LDAP directories. And I still use, it's called lbe.jar. It's right, it was the greatest LDAP browser utility ever created. I started using it in 2001, and I still have it on my computer today. It can do wonders, and it's a 25 plus year old Java jar file.
So I'm not familiar with this. Well, I guess what makes it timeless in your mind that it's held the test of 25 years on your
about 2010, I think Softera must have found a way to take it because they had the same exact interface. It was just modern. But the thing about it is you was able to use every feature possible in terms of certificates, and do things that you couldn't do with modern security controls. So I was able to connect to almost any Active Directory domain, Oracle directory, almost anything. And then I love virtual directories. So I was able to actually use it and kind of play around with, multiple directories all through one proxy, way back in the early 2000s.
I remember Softera. I used their LDAP browser as well, but
Yeah.
probably not to the level you were. I was looking at maybe 1 or 2 AD domains, and then I think I was using it all for also maybe some SQL stuff. I don't remember, but I was definitely not a pro with it. But you mentioned the word Softera. I was like, oh, I just had a flashback.
No, and that interface was exactly the same thing. It's just that this was, matter of fact, it was Java Swing, user interface. So it was old school.
So tell me about your role as the head of IAM at Discover Financial. What does that mean? Tell me, what does your day-to-day look like?
Managing the largest team in cybersecurity at Discover, because as you all know well, IAM has the most challenges and also the most opportunities. But we are the plumbing, and I tend to call IAM cyber adjacent. Some people like it when I do, some people don't. But I call it cyber adjacent because identity is really a combination of infrastructure services, cybersecurity, and risk GRC, like risk management. It's a combination of both, of all three. So it cannot fit in just one specific space. But most times it's either infrastructure or cybersecurity. And at Discover, we are within cybersecurity.
So cybersecurity adjacent, I guess I've always thought of IAM as in cybersecurity. What makes it adjacent for you?
So if you think about all the major utilities, the IGAs, the IDMs, the vaulting solutions, they all are basically shared services, which means they have a large component, which is infrastructure based. If you think about it, there's more focus on resiliency, operational overhead, consumption, and those are all infrastructure services. When you think about cybersecurity, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about sometimes, governance, risk, you're thinking about, security, incident response, detect, response. Those are kind of the areas of cybersecurity that most people think about. But identity is kind of like that mixture of, it has more products within it. So managing a product lifecycle, you are already doing more infrastructure-based services than strictly cyber.
I was looking through your LinkedIn profile, doing a little sleuthing and saying, hey, who is this guy, Steven? I noticed you've spent some time consulting, and we have a lot of consultants. Jim and I are consultants ourselves, that are listening. And I'm curious, what are some of the things that prepared you for your role? Because you also did work at Freddie Mac and you're with Discover now, but what are some of the things that you did as a consultant that really kind of prepared you for roles, we'll call it in industry, right? Or civilian life is maybe I might call it.
No, I have a really good story about that. I actually went from engineer, developer, architect, but I wanted to learn more about, how to run a business. So if you look at it, my pathway went from big pharma, big retail, then I jumped to a startup. After the startup, I spent a few years there, and I understood how to run a business when there's less than 10 employees. You have to basically wear every hat when there's less than 10 employees. But then I went to Deloitte after that because I said, okay, I know how to run a business. I'm learning it. But how do I articulate what it is that we need? Like, how do I get people to yes? My biggest mantra is, I'm going to get you to yes. People say no by default. So as a consultant, the job is to understand how to do PowerPoints, how to do decks, and how to communicate the vision, the operating model to the right audience. That's the most important part, is to the right audience. And when you focus on that, you can basically sell anything. And I leverage that because now in financial services, everyone wants to say no. It's just, it's corporate America. It's easier to say no than to say yes. So I get them to yes by doing one thing. If you tell me no, I say why, you give me data, I'll go back, use my consulting hat, and craft another or a better story to come back to you and say, well, you said no because of ABC. I solved for that, and then here's more data. Now do you say yes? And at some point in time, that iterative process, they're either going to say yes or say, Steven, get the hell out of here. So
stop bothering me. Here you go. Just get it done. One more question I want to ask you. I know we're going to talk about like user access reviews and maybe get some of that. But so there's a lot of people that I've noticed wanting to get into IAM. What would be a word of advice that you have for people who are looking to get into IAM as just the start of their journey, or maybe they're looking to pivot into IAM from some other field?
That is one of my favorite questions, Jeff. Let me tell you why. You can learn almost every other aspect of cybersecurity through a class, through a course, through some training, but you cannot learn IAM through a singular entity at all. You have to be broad in your skills to do IAM. You have to know a little bit of, operating systems. You have to know about directories. You have to know about networking. You have to know about firewalls. Especially today, everything is cloud-based. If you don't understand the simple proxy, reverse proxy, how to open up a port, you're not going to do well here. Even things as simple as IDP configurations. Now from cloud to cloud, SaaS to SaaS, you have to be well-versed in everything. So one of my favorite sayings is, jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. That creates an IAM professional. You have to know a lot about a lot, but you don't got to be super deep in any one thing to be amazing in this field.
Yeah, I really love that answer. I think what I would add to it is you mentioned a lot of the technical skills you need, but you also need to have business skills. You need to know things about human resources and how the business works. You have to at least be geared toward that to be really great at IAM. I also thought it was funny when you're talking about consulting, you brought it back to how do you sell things? But how do you sell an idea? So that is pretty funny. And as Jeff mentioned, I'm going to drag you down the route of talking about user access reviews. But before that, when we were talking in the beginning of the show about the idea around device identity, it almost looked like you wanted to jump right into the conversation at that point. So I was wondering, did I see that right? And is there anything that you wanted to say or that you were chomping at the bit to say?
Absolutely. I said, this is their show, so let me be quiet and stay on mute until my time is up. However, now that I can talk and I have the floor, I'll take it. When I think of device identity, it's so important that when you think about every device we have. In my house alone, there's probably 6, 7 Alexas, 8, 10 Series. Every device has some type of access management component to it. But I like what you said, Jeff, about when you think of it, you think about the authentication piece. But what folks don't realize is every device is doing a form of authentication. A lot of it is sometimes anonymous. A lot of it is some form of PKI, but is doing something or phoning home. And that's the part where it's tricky because most cyber professionals don't even use those, home utilities. Like they say, Alexa is disabled, everything else. But in general, Jim, I think it's just device identities we need to find a way to actually manage the life cycle, just like we do human accounts and non-human accounts. And it's going to get to a point sooner than later where we just have objects, identity objects. Everything is looked at through the lens of identity. And ironically, I'm going to use your pun, but yes, identity is at the center of everything. Identity is the front door. And what I say is to a house, identity is the front door. But also, when you go to each room, each lock on the door is another layer of identity. And then over time, we get to the point where as you in your kitchen and just hanging around, you're going to have something doing a check on, should you still be here? And is this still your own, which is a deeper layer of identity. So it's definitely at the center.
Yeah, it's crazy. You hear identity is the new perimeter, and then someone will say the next sentence, identity is at the center. So it's like identity is everywhere. Identity is the whole kit and caboodle. That could have been the name of the podcast.
That's too long for a URL. So just keep it at IDAC podcast.
You could use a tiny URL, Jeff. You can use a tiny URL, sir.
Oh. So security people don't like tiny URLs because you don't know where you're clicking on. We found that out early on where it was like, all right, we had, I think a sponsor gave us a tiny URL. And I got so many emails about,
skewered.
Hey, yeah, you should not use tiny URLs. I'm like, I understand. I get it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, here's a QR code. So, okay, let's talk about user access reviews, or what I've traditionally called recertification. I don't know if you even use that term, but user access reviews, you see them used a lot in financial services and heavily regulated industries. I'd say 5-10 years ago, outside of heavily regulated industries, people question, should I even do this thing, right? The only reason financial services is doing it is because they have regulators making them do that. So one, is that true? And, two, like, where is the value? Is it just to be compliant with regulation, or is there something more?
Very good question. And I'm thinking now, do I want to answer it positive or the way I already feel? Let's go positive first. So you are absolutely correct in terms of regulatory just environments, which is across multiple industries. There's a ton of value in user access reviews because it is both a detective and really a corrective type of control. At the end of the day, it's done to say, hey, should Jeff and Jim still maintain his access? And if they shouldn't, let me create an action where I do an attestation and say, nope, I want them out. And then some technology, some tool goes and remove them from that access. And for small, mid-sized companies, it works really well because there's not a lot of bloat in small and mid-sized businesses. The larger the company is, the more job roles of companies were really strong, let's say on RBAC, role-based access control. The more RBAC you use, the larger your access role environment is going to be, the more access certification, user access reviews you have. Once you hit that threshold, now it becomes more of, is there value in this, or is it just a checkbox activity? So I have a person, or I have people in multiple companies that they have to attest or certify over 1,000, 2,000 users. And sometimes it's twice a year, sometimes it's once a year. Certain things like privileged access, maybe every quarter, depending on the standards or the requirements of the company. When you have to do something this frequently, if the user interface isn't smart, most people tend to just do a checkbox activity. They say, you know what, we're just going to blindly check it all because I don't have the time, the bandwidth, or the understanding of what's needed. And when you think about that or kind of extrapolate that out, if that's being done, let's say 50% of the time, where's the value in it? But the value does come from the auditors, the regulators, because that's something that they can say, how do I trust that you're doing something? Something is always better than nothing. I mean, we can all agree to that. But at least I have a name associated to a decision. And that's probably the biggest value of user access reviews is you have a named resource making a decision on access. Regardless of how they made that decision, that certification is important and that's needed because for a regulatory body, they can say, okay, 99% of these folks attested in the positive. Great. 1% they're not. But all the access has been certified. I can take that and support any action or decision the company needs to make. So that's the value in that just overall.
So you're kind enough, diplomatic enough to take the positive side. I'm going to take it down the negative side a little bit and see if you agree with me. Are user access reviews a reaction to poor lifecycle management? Meaning we have to do user access reviews because we just don't do a good job of cleaning up accounts and accesses that shouldn't be there after they're no longer needed.
I did not know that question was coming, but I would say that that's a perfect segue to what my vision is in terms of what I've been designing for user access reviews. You are Absolutely correct, Jeff. And I'll take it a step further. The way that I think about this is the reason why they exist in general is because not only lifecycle management is really the access chain. It's how do I know that Jeff is using his access? So if you really think about it, like, let's give an example. If I say, hey, Jim, you have access to application A, but I modify my standards, my requirements to say a user should only have access to an application for 30 days. After 30 days, the access is automatically removed. That means that Jim accesses the application day 1, he gets in just fine. On day 32, he tries to access it, it says access denied. But so that alone is great, but then it becomes a really poor user experience because now Jim has to go through a whole access request again. No one wants that. But in terms of, we in 2025, we have so many tools out there that are great. So let's add some orchestration, some IDPs into it, and say on day 32, Jim goes to the application. The IDP says, nope, you don't have the right claim, the right access. However, it makes a call. Was Jim approved to have this access previously? If that answer is yes, then it can actually go ahead and give Jim the access again because the standard states he is only going to be good for 30 days. Because of that, that process makes it a great user experience. Jim doesn't have to lose his access, but there's no standing permissions. Jim doesn't have the access more than he's needed. And if there's a need for a certification, then it's probably going to be empty because most people don't use applications, day in and day out. They really don't. I think even an HR tool like a Workday, which is, really generic, almost every company has it. You use it maybe to do your goals or a check-in, right? Like you're not using tools all the time.
Stephen, I wanted to ask you what you meant about UI, but I think that's going to be part of your answer to my different question, which is, so Jeff and I are very fortunate. We get to go to a lot of conferences. Doing the podcast, a lot of vendors reach out to us. We see a lot of demonstrations of IGA products and the amount of innovation that's still happening in the space. IGA, it's been around for quite a long time, right? But people are continuing to innovate. And I'd say, why is that? What are the innovations that to you are exciting without getting into specific vendor names, right? We're going to keep, yeah.
Yeah, no. I think that the biggest one is the use of AI, of course, in ML, right? At the end of the day, let's go back to the example I said of the individual that had 1,000 access requests he had to attest. Well, AI ML now has the ability to go look at it and do some of the things I mentioned. Hey, when was the last time they used this access? Hey, did all their team members use the same access? So now we can have more smart IGA, more smart services to say, hey, Jeff, out there 1,750 are because of the team name, the team description, and their all operation and support. They should have that. You can then say, okay, I'm going to blanket approve that because those 750, I don't have to look at. Now you're down to 250, which is much more manageable. But then the AI ML can do even more stuff and say, hey, only about 25 of these are privileged. So now that 1,000 goes down to 25. And what you're doing now, hopefully, is saying, let me, you use a fine tooth comb and go through those 25 each and hopefully remove access that shouldn't exist or just say, yes, they all should be maintained. So that's really where the innovation is coming from, Jim.
Yeah, I think that's a huge innovation is the AI. I also see backend changes that are happening where it's like no longer are these IGA systems running on a relational SQL database, right? They're running big data platforms and allowing organizations to identify what is identity data to them, what is risk data to them, or data that can be part of the risk story. So if you start to say, what is, not only what am I using, but what am I not using that is of relevance, right? So if I don't look at the cafeteria menu, are you going to take the cafeteria menu away from me? Like, what's the point? It's zero value. The value is I've got a very powerful role in a very important, risky system. Now let's challenge on something like that. Well, I've got to be able to draw the connectivity to that risk level, and that might be very specific to my organization.
I would say this, I would say this, Jim. I look at this really well around, I love the construct of an identity data lake. And what I mean by that is we need to basically put all our identity data, access management data, access role data, request data, access chaining data. And you're right, SQL databases aren't always the best for that. Some of the new graph kind of DBs are really good. But the whole point of this is now if I have to do something like give to a regulator or an auditor, they say, hey, Steve, I want to know all the access that was provisioned for this application over the last 6 months. Well, right now, I'm going through my tools and extracting reports and doing some pivot tables or some VLOOKUPs. That's a lot of work. If we have all this in like a data lake, I can easily create a query to pull that data, but now I can also align and correlate it to an access request number. Let's say a ServiceNow request. And then they can actually see that it was actually done, and they can give the reason and the description all in place. So using that data from, let's say, a data lake, you can now pull from not only the access request data, the lifecycle management data, any privilege access, as well as any pre-existing certification data. All that is now combined in one location where you can do easy queries to extract that and make better fine-grained decisions on the actual real data.
Yeah. So let me ask this question. So obviously we talked about the AI and kind of like narrowing the focus on the important decisions. Is that really also being driven in part by what we call identity fatigue? Just, it winds up in a large organization where there's a few people who become, I don't want to use the term bottlenecks because it sounds so negative, but the idea that they wind up becoming the person who approves or disapproves a large amount of access, and really trying to tailor identity becomes an exercise so that they don't get overwhelmed and start rubber stamping access. Is that kind of the driver in your mind?
That's the largest driver, but I guess in addition to that, you also have, I call it identity hygiene. Most people do it now. It's the hygiene part has been what's been missing over the last decade. We all, even tools, products, vendors, startups, they all want to do the action. Let's make a better IGA. Let's make a better LCM, lifecycle management. Let's make better tools to actually, and better products so we can sell the product. But what they forget is the cleanup is actually more important. Because you can have one of the best products in the world if you keep on provisioning, keep on adding, and never clean up or remove, your actual audit data is poor because the hygiene is poor. And that means that now more people are doing requests. And guess what? That leads to the fatigue because now it's saying, I don't know why I'm improving this, but I've been doing it for 7 years. There could be no one even used. The application can be gone in the environment, but people can still be potentially approving that access because it's the name is on the sheet that comes across every 6 months.
I've seen some scenarios where the access review with AI looks like this. So Jeff works for Steven. Steven, here's the access that Jeff has, and then AI highlights 3 or 4 entitlements that, hey, you may really want to look at this. So if you're Steven, you're only going to look at those 3 and ignore the rest, right? So why even show the rest? Is it because some organizations just say, hey, we have to check this box from a regulation and compliance standpoint, so we're going to show all 25. We all probably agree it's only the 3 that matter. And I know I'm asking a super generalized question. It probably depends a little bit on the situation. But do you feel like that's something that regulators are going to push back on and say, no, sorry, the rule says you got to review the access, so you need to look at all 25, and you can use AI to kind of point people, but you can't eliminate 22 of them?
So, really good question, and I have a great answer for that. If you think about this, Jim, if you didn't change anything in the organization and you brought in a tool to do that, that would not pass an audit exam. it will not pass a regulatory exam. Because even though it's better and it's actually reducing more risk and it's actually a better hygiene, most companies, the auditors, the regulators, their job is to validate what you have written in your standards and your requirements. Think about it as like a soft skills. A lot of engineers like working and consultants like the hard skills, the hands-on, the tangible skills. But even when it comes to things like access reviews or just anything that's audit related, you have to focus on changing your actual requirements and your standards and your policies. By changing that, if I just change the line, Jim, and said, we're going to certify multiple times a year access that is determined through a systematic / AI generated method, the ones that need to be reviewed, then I can now use that because the auditor, the regulator has to look at what the requirement is for our organization.
Okay, so you have to kind of take that stepwise approach where you first change the policy and then you comply with your own policy. That makes sense to me.
You got it.
Last thing I want to kind of explore when it comes to access reviews is what is your advice for the practitioners out there who are maybe doing access reviews the old-fashioned way, or let's call it IGA Gen 1? Are we really now at IGA Gen 2? Do you think if I wait a couple of years, it's going to be dramatically better and I should sit around and, watch what happens in the market? Or, what are your thoughts?
You know what? I would say this. I would say that the last conference I went to a few months ago, there was 2 complete rows of just IGA startups and vendors. And even though to me that seems like it's overkill, it actually gives us hope because that means people are now invested heavily in doing this, not the best, but doing it in a way that is modernized and that's more efficient. So at some point in time, having access to the data is going to translate into leveraging tools / processes to be able to make better decisions. So right now we say IGA 1 is the normal access certifications through IGA 2. We're going to skip Gen 2, V2, because right now V2 is now adding AI and ML into it, but it's still in its early states. The next generation is going to have that more hard and fast. Like it's going to be modernized, it's going to be tested, but even the vendors have to understand it can't just be about the technology. You have to look at it as how can you approach some of these regulatory bodies and these compliance bodies and say, hey, will you be okay if our solution shows you this? Because that's how you really get to the next level, is companies can't just say, let's have the best product. They gotta say, let's have the best product that can comply with all the regulations out there.
Well, I think the best product is what you can afford also. I think there's an underserved market for IGA where you've got the big behemoths, and we all know who those people are, those companies. There's a lot of companies that can't afford those types of things. And there's a lot of good IGA, or, sometimes they're called IGA light vendors that are also helpful. But even those vendors, I'm seeing kind of what their pricing has been, and it's there isn't much of a financial benefit to just say, okay, well, for 10% more, 15% more, whatever the number is, right? I'm just making them up. I can go with a tried and true, established, world class, partner of this, or do I gamble on something that is nobody's ever used before? And they might have a great product, but trying to get in the door without references, without a track record, I feel like in that case, and I'm focused mostly on small, mid-sized businesses, they don't have the money to afford, an upper right Gartner quadrant for the most part, unless they are heavily regulated, or maybe they've had an impact, an incident or something like that, right, where they have to do something about it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I want to chime in on something from even Jim said, how do the current practitioners do this? In most SMBs, a lot of people do this with just spreadsheets today. So let's not even talk about tools. Spreadsheets today are some of the easiest ways to go ahead and say, hey, I've done my access certification. Because depending on the volume, if it's only, let's say, 50 people in a company, you can do that pretty easily. Now, most, let's say, financial companies or companies have the alliance to, say, PCI, as an example. PCI 4.0, really was published and came out truly like last year, but it goes into effect starting this year. There's a requirement about service accounts, non-human identities, having to be kind of certified. Most IGA tools today don't really do service account or non-human identities well. Like they're not, because it's not as simple as just pulling from an existing, lifecycle management tool and just showing on the screen, hey, accounts, entitlements. So because at PCI 4, more companies are trying to now get into service accounts or non-human identities certifications. And it's driven because now PCI is saying you have to do this. So sometimes the regulations and the regulators kind of help lead and define where the industry is going. And that's a very positive thing.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think I want to try and take advantage of your big brain when it comes to this stuff. So we have a listener out in the western part of the US, Bert. And he and I were trading a couple of messages on LinkedIn. And he wanted us to do a podcast on how in-scope companies can comply with NYDFS. And I'll explain in a second. Because one of their IAM requirements is periodically, but at a minimum annually, review all user access privileges and remove or disable accounts and access that are no longer necessary. So first of all, let me explain NYDFS because we have people around the world and people not be familiar with that. NYDFS is the New York Department of Financial Services, and they have a cybersecurity requirement for financial services companies that operate in the state of New York, where they have to have a cybersecurity program and certain controls to, maintain confidentiality, integrity, availability, right? All those types of stuff. And of course, if there's cybersecurity regulation, there are IAM components. And one of those is this idea of doing user access reviews. So I want to bring this back to you because obviously, this is something that's probably near and dear to your heart is, can you talk about NYDFS and specifically the user access review component of that? How should financial services firms be looking at how to comply with that? What should we be looking at? What should we be certifying? What should we not be certifying? And are there any gotchas or things or tips and tricks that you might have?
No, absolutely. So NYDFS, I've worked for a few companies that have been in scope for that, but I'll make it a little bit more broader for the entire audience. I mean, think about NYDFS, think about the Federal Reserve Board, FDIC. You can think about even SOX, SOX compliance, SOC 1 compliance. They all have these similar requirements. And sometimes the best way that I tell people to kind of point them to is if your cybersecurity program aligns with the NIST cybersecurity framework, you're going to naturally 99% align to everything else, to all the regulatory bodies. Because most of the bodies pull from things like NIST. I mean, other frameworks as well, but the NIST CSF, cybersecurity framework, especially the 2.0, is where a lot of the government cybersecurity programs, the NYDFS and others are pulling from. And the really importance of access reviews from NYDFS or anyone else is really defining what is the scope of the access review. Meaning, I think Jim mentioned earlier, or something about like Adobe or something like that is, do I want to test or certify Adobe Acrobat Reader? What's the value of something like that? It's a product that most people have. Chrome, web browsers, is there really value in it? Now, if it's a financial SOX tool, there's a ton of value in testing it. The problem in the industry is this. Everyone have not scoped out the applications or the access that truly require it. So a regulatory body or an internal auditor, all they can do is say, show me everything. And that's the biggest issue. Without having that scope clearly defined, you have to produce everything for them. And it does make sense. It's like, if you can't tell me exactly what's in scope, I have to see everything.
I like that idea of scoping because I do see that as an issue. I think one of the main things to consider in this might be non-public information, right? Who cares about the stuff that is public? It's public, right? Why you're reviewing that access. But I think one of the areas that maybe helps fine-tune, right, what you should be looking at are what are the things that are not public? And then from the non-public information, what are things that do carry the risk factors that might be associated with either data breach or maybe it's transmission of that data, obviously customer data, or things like that. I love that idea of getting your scope right. Because if you don't have the scope right, it's like you said before, my experience auditors, they're just checking what you said you're going to do. And if you haven't written your policy or your standard or whatever it is that you do, to articulate that, and you leave it open to interpretation, that's where you get into trouble. So I think if you craft very well-defined policy standards and processes around what are we looking at, and try to leave as few argument points as possible that someone can go against, you'll be in a much better position. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And even more so, there is so much value in taking the time to architect and design the processes for a program, for an identity program. And what I mean by that is I'm teaching my own organization, my team. Don't just look for technology to solve the problem. Create a process that you want to solve for. And then you can look to see, do you need technology or do you just need, people? Like, not everything is solved by having just the biggest hammer, and
but we bought IGA. It's going to solve all our problems.
If that was the case, the world would be in a better place, and I won't have to talk to any regulators or auditors in my life. Unfortunately, even they don't like automation. I mean, we all love talking about automation, and we got scripting languages, and we can do all these wonderful things. Even when you give it to them, they'll say, the next question is, well, how do I know this is complete and accurate? And it's like, oh. So at the end of the day is trying to be fancy with the regulators and the auditors does not work. It's simply giving them your scope and saying, this is what we're doing for our scope.
Now, they could always argue other points, right? You should be looking to start thinking, okay, well, that's a different discussion. Now it's not what we're looking at, is what else should we be looking at, which is probably a better position to be in, I guess. I've had to write management responses in the past. They're not fun.
Oh, no, they are not at all.
At some point, the world and the industry and everyone is going to start shifting to automation and AI and all these, cool tools that are still relatively cutting edge for a lot of organizations. And auditors are going to be like, the policy or the configuration is going to be, all right, well, we do this through our IGA platform and it's all automated. At some point, the auditors are probably going to ask more questions around how is the product configured? What are the configurations or policies that you've set up within the actual tools? Do you have any thoughts or guidance on how you might want to address that in the future for people who are listening?
Yeah, one of the first things is you have to make sure that you train your auditors. And I know that sounds kind of funny, but at the end of the day,
it's absolutely true.
it's so true. It's how much time do you want to spend every cycle teaching them about what you're doing? But even things, we all know that a policy-based access control is probably the best thing. But it is so challenging and difficult to get to policy-based access control, no matter what tools exist, no matter how much you try, because RBAC is just easier. RBAC is just easy. Even attribute-based access control, ABAC, even ABAC is a little bit easier. But when it comes to policy-based, that is where it's going. And once we can tie together that a policy is almost its own requirement, and that requirement can be tied to a standard, then the auditors can actually start to take that, because they can easily correlate and tick and tie. This policy here is referenced in this standard or policy, and I can actually control and validate that myself. So we need to get there. And the only way the automation is going to work is if we actually get to the point where they can trust the policy. But that also requires a lot of training and teaching to let them know how this actually works.
It's interesting you said RBAC and ABAC are easier. I think they're easier to explain to people. To actually be successful in managing them to get the results that you want, I don't know that it's easier.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I would say that it's the name, like everyone understands RBAC. And,
right.
And most people who call me to do an assessment, they always say, oh yeah, we can talk about, the best RBAC model to use. And whenever someone says RBAC model to me in the last 2-3 years, I look at them with trepidation. Like, are you telling me
sure?
that RBAC is the best thing to use right now with this whole cloud SaaS base, just in time, no standard permissions? Are you sure you want to go in there?
it's hard. I think there's a lot of companies who wish they were RBAC, and there's a lot of companies that are RBAC and wish maybe they hadn't gone down the RBAC route. It's
100%.
It's difficult to do. It's why I typically will encourage organizations that are starting down that road to maybe focus on attribute-based access control, because I feel it's a little bit more of a hill versus a mountain. It still requires good data, right? And the idea is like through any of these back models, whatever they are, is you still need data to drive that. And I feel like most organizations, even if it's just basic attribute-based access control, is the person an employee or not? That might be as granular as you can get based on the data, but hey, at least it's something. And you start working with your business partners on the HR side, right? Hey, if we got this data, we could do this thing, right? And I think it's funny you mentioned training auditors. And I think that is the importance of establishing relationships with other groups, right? If you have a good relationship with your auditors, they can be advocates for you. I think a lot of times they come in as the enemy to some degree. But if they understand how you're operating and you've trained them, you've educated them on, look, here's what we're doing, and you actually engage them in a proactive way and say, hey, here's what we're doing. What am I missing? You're going to audit me. Tell me what I need to be looking for. Help me out here. Their job isn't really to get you into trouble, because most likely, especially in the bigger organization, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, you have an internal audit team that does like an internal check, and then the external auditors come in. And those are the ones you want to be very concerned about. So almost like a catch before the real audit comes through. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, I tell everyone this. Internal audit, which we call the third line of defense, their job is to be independent, but their job is the same job as first line of defense, which is normally us, is to protect the company, period. When we look at them as the bad cop, for example, we're not getting the best out of the partnership. Yes, we can't share everything because they have to still maintain independence, and that's important. Now, the external auditors just come in with industry best practices in the checkbox and say, we need to say, are you doing A, B, C, D, E, and F? And then show me that you're doing A, B, C, D, E, and F. So you really can't build relationships with external auditors as much, but your internal audit program is there to protect the company the same reason as you are.
Well, I appreciate you spending time with us. I think there's so much going on here, and this is one of those things where I wouldn't say it's a sexy part of IAM, but it's a necessary part. It's plumbing. I guess how sexy it is based on the UI maybe you've created. Maybe that can have some bells and whistles on it. But I really appreciate you spending time with us. I want to end the show on a lighter note. We were talking, and I just kind of sprung this before we hit record here. You mentioned that you are, you're definitely into fitness. You mentioned things like Tough Mudder, Spartan races, Pelotons, working out. Obviously, you and Jim can probably go on at this for about an hour. I'll just kind of nod politely and stare at my Peloton row that's over here that has been collecting dust. Tell me about Tough Mudder and Spartan races and all these things that you're doing to sort of stay fit. And I guess explain them in a way that's like, okay, not everyone may be familiar with what these are. Explain for people that aren't familiar what a Tough Mudder is, for example.
So I'll get there, but I want to talk about the why behind it. The why is when you run large organizations or just have a lot of work, our work, cybersecurity, is stressful. I don't care what anyone says. It is stressful, it's a lot of work, and we all need a reprieve. Some people do that different ways, Healthy ways are working out like crazy, other ways are drinking. I mean, whatever floats your boat. But at the end of the day, I got into just physical fitness about 5 years ago. Doctor was like, you're either going to make a change, Stephen, or you're not going to be around. So I said, let me go all the way in and make a change. But the Tough Mudder is an obstacle course based race. My first one we did 3.1 miles, like a 5K. But next we're doing one in April, which is 15K. So close to 10 miles roughly. And it's about 25 obstacles. And when I say that it's called Tough Mudder, half the obstacles require some form of mud or water. But when you already have mud and you go into a pool of water, it will become muddy. But it's fun because it's not just a race. You got to work as a team, as a group. And I think the reason I love it so much is that it's about 10 to 15 of us who do it together. And it's not about who can win, because some of the races or some of the obstacles, you have to use 3-4 people to form a base. Then 2 people have to climb on top of them. Then the one person has to climb on top of all of them. And then you got to then pull each one up as well. So it really is more teamwork and building that camaraderie. And most of my workout partners, we all met during COVID on Peloton. So during COVID, no one was at gyms, and we just used the Peloton as a way to engage, interact. We had, Facebook groups, and we said when it was over, hey, let's meet up in real life and do some physical activities.
I love that. And you mentioned you've got the whole Peloton armada between the row, the bike, the tread. Which is your favorite of those three? Because I've only used the bike and the row.
So the tread is my favorite, but it's any of the machines are great. But I have such a competitive spirit that the reason why I like Peloton is because of one thing, the leaderboard. Mm-hmm. And some days I wake up and say, I'm going to have a low impact day. And I'll get on the bike or get on the tread. I do a nice jog. And then someone will high five me, and like they're right next to me, but they're below me in terms of like the output. But then they'll high five me and then pass me. And my gut feeling is that intentional? Like I'm trying to
That was chill. Like the peace, dude. I'm going to fly past you.
I'm like, I'm trying to chill. So when I see that, Jeff, it's like, here we go now. Turn everything up. Take the shirt off, and now I'm just running. Now I was like, okay, let me get to the 6-minute mile, and let me see how long I can hold this, and we out. So yeah,
I love that. What is your favorite and least favorite Tough Mudder obstacle?
The ice bucket or the ice pool is probably my least favorite.
Okay, what is that?
Yeah. So we had the ice bucket challenge from a few years ago, where basically bucket of ice, or even going to like ice bath. It's basically 2 ice baths put together, and you got to go underneath 2 walls, all inside of the ice bath. So you literally got to climb inside and then go under the water. So it's all ice now, and then you got to come up and then go under it again and come up. And this is normally at the end of the race. So you're already muddy. I mean, so some people say, well, it's cleaning you up. No, it is still.
I can think of better ways to get clean.
Sub-0 degrees. And what happens right after that is the electrical shock. So it's like a whole lot of strings of just electrified, tape. And you got to then run through that after you just came out the ice bath. So yeah, that is not the best part. I think it was one obstacle that was fun. It was huge tree logs, and they had like little notches in it, complete mud. And you had to literally throw your body up or try to jump and grab on. And it reminded me of when I was young, I used to watch American Gladiator, and just that show. I always wanted to do things like that, and just trying to like climb over, like those rollers in American Gladiator. So I always tend to think that I'm back in the 90s and 2000s watching American Gladiator and going crazy.
Jim, I know you work out. Jim, I've known you for 9 years, 10 years, something like that.
Yep.
And ever since I've known you, you are religious about your workouts every day. I don't know if you've ever done a Tough Mudder. Is that something you would do?
It's not. So it's so funny. When I was listening to Stephen talk about why he started, how he started, it felt like he was telling my story. But I've been at this probably 15 years. So exact same thing. I'd be in this stressful world of IT and InfoSec. And I end the day, like I had to wind down, so it'd be a couple beers or something, and then you just start to realize like that's not good for you. So I started running, and I worked my way all the way up to doing marathons. It didn't take really that long, maybe a year, from going from having a few beers after work to just I'm going to go run for a couple hours. And what a stress reliever. I did wind up hurting my back running, and I started doing more like cross training and trying to build up strength in my core, because what I realized was you get these really powerful calves from running, but it doesn't necessarily build a strong core. So I started building my core. That led to more or less like bodybuilding style workouts. And I love being strong. I love seeing muscle in my body. It makes me eat better. I truly used to do it because like I liked looking better, made me feel better about myself. Now I just do it because it's my stress relief. It's my outlet. And I don't know how I would deal with stress without it. So yeah, it's a very similar story to Stephen, but why I couldn't see myself doing like Tough Mudder or something similar is like in my old age, I've kind of realized like I can only do what I do if I don't get hurt. So if I do something that's going to risk injury, it doesn't mean you're going to get injured. But, you know, when I hear about people doing things that are, you know, prone to injury, like doing like deadlifting heavy weight and stuff like
Jumping
that.
at a muddy tree log and trying to hang on.
That kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, well, what if I slip a disc or something and I'm, you know, out of the gym for 6 months? I'm not going to do that. So, you know, yeah, it's like super risk averse, but that's kind of the reason I don't do things that are risky like that.
But that makes a lot of sense, Jim. I mean, one other thing that I thought about as you were speaking, Jim, is I also work out about 2 hours a day because my vice is grilled cheese and French fries. So in order for me to maintain when I'm traveling, to have some fries when I want to, I need to make sure that I work out. But my 19-year-old daughter says this about me. She says, my dad has two extremes. He's either a kids menu guy, grilled cheese and fries, or he's like an A5 Wagyu steak guy. And I said, I mean, she's not wrong, but it's just like, I can go eat at any restaurant, there's a kids menu, or I can go to a nice steakhouse and enjoy myself as well.
That's actually, so now you're talking Jeff's talk.
Yeah, now I would say now you've got me interested. All right, describe your perfect grilled cheese. What's the right cheese for a Stephen Washington grilled cheese sandwich? And the bread too.
So sourdough bread, first and foremost.
I'm with you.
Has to be sourdough.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And now no cheese looks better than American. However, as we get older, I realize American probably isn't really cheese, but I'm saying that for a different show. Okay. So cheddar, white cheddar. I also like Gouda. I like some Swiss and mozzarella. So it's a crazy combination. But if I'm going to do one, it's like the white cheddar. But I also enjoy Gouda cheese, which is kind of odd because it's more smoky flavor as well. But sourdough bread and just cheddar cheese combination is great. And some restaurants like Melt is really awesome, even though they probably add too much butter. I think they add like a whole stick of butter for one sandwich. But when you work out for 2 hours, you can do that, guy.
Yeah, you got a little leeway there. I'm with you on the sourdough. I think sourdough is fantastic. I am a American and pepper jack mix because I want a little bit of a spice to it. Not crazy, but enough there. And I'll never turn down ham or bacon or something like that. But what I like is when we press the sandwich as thin as possible. Like almost in between, like not a panini, but like pressed. And man, I can put those away.
No, Jeff. Okay, so now I gotta add this. My best thing is when I say I've been fasting because I do intermittent fasting as well. So when I eat a ton. And sometimes like I want some bread. So I get 3 slices of bread, layer multiple layers of cheese between each thing, some ham, and then I literally will have a press, not panini, but just like a metal, like a cast iron press that I just put down on top of the skillet. And I just push that down. And that's the best, most unhealthiest thing potentially in the world.
So good.
But it's so good. It's so good.
All right. We're going to wrap up grilled cheese at the center for this week. Stephen, you've been so great with your time. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to maybe giving you an official fist bump of gratitude for being on the show at a conference at sometime in the future. I'll have your LinkedIn profile as well in our show notes, if that's okay. People can reach out with questions or grilled cheese recipes or whatever it may be. And then, Jim, you and I will be on the web as usual, idacpodcast.com. Connect with us. If you're listening to this, go on over to our YouTube channel, hit that like and subscribe button. That's helping us grow. And appreciate you sharing with friends or enemies. We don't care. Whoever listens, as long as they like and subscribe, I don't care. So with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks, everyone, for watching and or listening. And we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.